Welcome everybody. Well, I hope you all had a great time introducing yourself to a new friend. I feel like all of you made 50 new friends, which is fantastic. So thank you all so much again. We'll get started in just a second now, inshallah. Can I quickly ask you all to, if you could pull out your phones, and you could open up your Instagram because I know you have one. If you want to follow us and find out about more events that we will continue to do, inshallah, we are rise.iar on Instagram. We'll be posting future programs here as well, so please do go ahead and give a follow. I will go ahead and introduce our speaker. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Yasmin. How are you? Good, alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for being here. All right, Jazakallah khair, everyone. We will get started officially. Bismillah. Yasmin Mujahid is an author and an international speaker who focuses her work on spirituality and healing from a psycho-spiritual perspective. She recently released her new book, Healing the Emptiness, and has also authored the best-selling Reclaim Your Heart and Love and Happiness, which are all available today. She received her bachelor's degree in psychology and her master's in journalism and mass communications from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She has also worked as a writer for the Huffington Post and has taught Islamic psychology seminars around the world. Jazakallah khair, Sister Yasmin, for being here. We are really looking forward to learning with you and learning from you. And bismillah, we can get started, inshallah.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. It's an honor to be here with you during this very turbulent time. And I think that it's extremely important that we remind ourselves and others, for truly the reminders benefit the believers. So there's a few things that I want to focus on today, inshallah. The first thing that I want to focus on is the meaning of victory. The meaning of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises for the believer. We as Muslims, we as believers, we know that when Allah says something, it is the truth. Capital T. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. I'll translate this and then talk about it. He says, do not weaken and do not despair. Do not weaken and do not despair. And I'll pause there for a second because I think that this is a very good, I'd say, summary of the general sentiment. I think, and it's very natural. The feeling of despair, the feeling of helplessness, and maybe even the feeling of hopelessness. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking to the human nature. Human nature is that when we feel, when it appears as though we are out of control, when it appears as though we don't have control over the outcome, when it appears as though things are happening and we have no say in the matter, we tend to fall into helplessness and hopelessness. But this is an illusion, and I'll tell you why. Because first and foremost, we are not in control at all, ever. We are not the ones bringing about outcomes. You and I are not at the steering wheel. And if you or I believe that we are the ones at the steering wheel, we will, number one, have a great deal of anxiety all the time. And number two, we will fall into despair when the outcome isn't as we want it, or when the outcome appears externally to be negative. We will fall into despair. That is if we believe that we're in charge. I'm at the steering wheel and this boat is not going in the direction I want. I start to become very anxious and I start to fall into despair. So the first lesson is that we were never in control. We were never at the steering wheel. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. You know, it's very interesting that the Prophet ﷺ said this statement is a cure for 99 ailments, 99 diseases. And the least of them is stress. The least of them is stress. Why is that? Because the statement is very profound. La hawla, let's look at the first part of the statement. La hawla literally means that there is no change. There can be no change from one state to another. Yatahawwal, to change. La hawla. There is no change in any state. وَلَا قُوَّةَ, and no power or strength. إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ, except by Allah. Now this structure is interesting because it's the same sort of negation structure that we have with the shahada, isn't it? The shahada says, La ilaha first. What does saying La ilaha mean? That's kufr. The first half of the statement is kufr because you're saying there's no ilah. But why do you do that? Why not just say Allah is Allah is God? Why not say Allah huwa al-ilah? We don't say that. You say La ilaha first. And saying La ilaha first clears the slate. It's blank. Why? To give exclusivity to Allah. So that you can't say Allah is the ilah along with something else. You can't say it's my money plus ilah, plus Allah. It's my nafs, it's my hawa plus Allah. It's society plus, there's nothing there because you've started off by clearing the slate. La ilaha illallah. And then you say, except Allah. Except Allah. So that Allah has exclusivity in our hearts as an ilah. And an ilah, by the way, is more than just something you pray to. An ilah is the thing you put at the center. The thing that you revolve your life around. The thing that you love most. The thing that you fear most. The thing that you seek most. The thing that you would live for and die for. The first thing on your mind when you wake up. The last thing before you sleep. The thing you think about all day. That thing that makes you, that moves you most. So it's your center. It's the core. It's what's at the core of your heart. And a lot of people, they say La ilaha illallah with their tongues, but the heart has something else in the core. Okay? A different competitor with Allah. Sometimes it's our money. Sometimes it's status. Sometimes it's our own hawa. This is a big one. In fact, we live in a society, subhanAllah, we've got a lot of we've got a pause from this I guess, obsession with pushing this agenda, and that agenda is worship your hawa. Basically, let me just translate that as a side, because it's important. Hawa means my own inclination, my own orientation, my own identification, my own desires, whims, etc. So hawa includes all of these things. Allah describes a people in the Quran who take their hawa, and you guys will be able to relate to this if you listen carefully, who take their hawa as their Lord. اتخذوا إلهه هواه. اتخذ إلهه هواه. Meaning, his ilah is his hawa. Does that sound familiar? Basically, what it means in practical terms is whatever you think, feel, identify, incline towards, that's what you worship. Meaning, that's what defines you. That's what you obey. You're a slave to that. So Allah warns us against this. All right? And there are various types of ilahs that we take and things that compete with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another big one, by the way, and I'm speaking to a group of women here, so this is going to sound really strange. Another center that we take and is actually very much applauded and encouraged is our own children. And that's going to sound really weird, but we are very much taught to put our children in the center and then to revolve our lives around our children. And why is this so dangerous? Because our only center should be Allah. And that might sound strange because it's like, no, but that's love. But that's not love. That is actually unhealthy. And so this all comes back to having the right center. So when you say La ilaha illallah, Allah is negating anything else. Not your husband, not your wife, not your son, not your daughter, not your money, not your hawa. There's a lot of things that we worship, by the way. And there's a lot of things that we're taught to worship. And in some cases, in the society we live in now, we're almost forced to worship. You better worship your hawa, or else. You know, it's like, it's not a very tolerant ideology. It's not a tolerant religion. You know what I mean? You know, Islam says, lakum dinukum waliya din. We say this. To you is your way. This is what it means. Lakum dinukum waliya din means to you is your way, and to me is mine. We don't enforce our way on others. We wear hijab, we don't force others to wear hijab. We fast, we don't force others to fast. We believe la ilaha illallah, we don't force others to believe it. But we have an ideology right now that forces itself upon everyone, and and even goes into the schools and says, no, this is the only right way to believe, and this is the only right ideology. So it's a very, very there's no tolerance, you know what I mean? There's no lakum dinukum waliya din, if you guys get what I'm saying. And as a side note, this ideology also has its da'wah machine, you know, called Netflix. And it's a da'wah machine. That's what it is. It's to spread and enforce this ideology. Which, what is it? Let's go back to it. Worship your hawa. Hawa is supreme. Hawa is the ilah. There's no Lord above hawa. So and I repeat, what is hawa? Your inclination, identification, desires, whims. That is the Lord. You are subservient to that. You worship that. Allah warns us about this in the Quran. And He says, do you see the one who took his hawa as his ilah? Do you know what happens to that person? That person loses their ability to hear and see, and there is a cover on their heart. Very scary. You become deaf, dumb, and blind if you worship the hawa. And as a reminder, everyone has desires. Everyone has inclinations and opinions and identifications and whims. But we just can't worship that. We can't. There has to be something that trumps all that, that comes above all that, and that we become subservient to something higher than just my own, you know, inclination for that day, that my whim of the day. Because inclinations and desires and identifications, as you know, change. They might change every day. They might change every week. This cannot be what we worship. So going back to the concept here, when you say La ilaha illallah, you're negating any other ilah except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That there is nothing worthy of worship or being at the center except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here, Allah is telling us, do not weaken and do not despair. Do not weaken and do not despair. Why? Because, and now going back to, let me just go back quickly to La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah is telling us, again, the same thing. You negate all other sources of power. All other sources of strength and change. Are you with me? La hawla. Nothing will ever change. Nothing changes. And there's no power or strength. Again, negation, complete clean slate. Illa billah, except by God. Full stop. Like, do you get it? Now that concept is essential. Because if I think that I'm the one who brings about change, or if I think that I'm the one who's in control, if I think I'm the one steering this ship, not only will I live with constant anxiety, but I will fall into despair. And so this is a reminder, we're not in charge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge. Now Allah gives us a promise. He says, do not weaken and do not despair, for surely you will win. You will have victory. You will always have the upper hand. If, and it's conditional, in kuntum mu'minin. If you are truly believers, that is the lesson. Okay, so now the question is, what is victory? We said that the promise of Allah is true, right? We all agree with that? And the promise of Allah is that the believer always gets victory. We agree, because Allah said so. But it's very easy to look right now at what's happening and say, what victory? I don't see victory. I don't see victory. Where's the victory? What? Over 12,000 innocent civilians dead. The number is higher than that. 8,000 of them children. Where's the victory? I don't see victory in that. And this is where we have to understand what is truly the meaning of victory. Now, I'm just going to give a few examples to explain this point. But the fundamental concept has to be based on this. As believers, we know that there are two worlds. There is the seen world, the things we see, and there is the unseen world called the ghaib. Okay? What are the things in the seen world? Well, we see physical bodies, we see sickness, we see death, we see poverty. These are things that we see in the physical world. And then there's the unseen. The unseen are things like the help of Allah, like Iman, like angels, like the hereafter. Do we see the hereafter? Do we see Jannah? Do we see the barzakh, the time in the grave? No. That's all part of the unseen. So now we agree, we have the seen world, which includes dunya and the physical world. We'll call that the physical world. And then we have the unseen world, which includes the unseen, which is the spiritual world or the hereafter. So you see the two categories, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, بعد ألف لام ميم ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين. So he says that this is a book that has guidance for the muttaqeen, the people, the God conscious. Who are they? الذين يؤمنون بالغيب. So the first description of the people of God consciousness who can benefit from this book is what? They believe in the unseen. We have to be a people who believe in the unseen, or none of this will make sense. None of it. We will not be able to cope. We will say, where is the victory? We will say, it's not fair. That will definitely be the response if we do not believe in the ghaib. And so, we have to go back to the ghaib in understanding the big picture. Now, what is the meaning of victory? I want to give you guys an example, okay? At the time of just before the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the companions were going with the Prophet ﷺ because they were planning on doing Umrah, right? And as you know, they were blocked from doing Umrah. And what ended up happening is that they made a covenant. They basically made an alliance with the Prophet. They gave bay'ah, allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ, that they were willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. After that, they signed this treaty which seemed as though it was a loss for the believers. It actually looked extremely, on the outside, looked like very oppressive and unfair. And yet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at this time reveals which surah? Surah Al-Fath. Anyone know what Al-Fath means? The victory. Doesn't that sound strange? It was at a time where there didn't seem to be any victory in the physical world, right? There didn't seem to be any reason to be celebrating anything. It actually seemed like a defeat. And yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ فَتَحْنَا لَكَ فَتْحًا مُبِينًا. So this means that indeed we have opened for you, we have given you a manifest victory, like not just a victory, but mubin is like very obvious. And you know that even Umar radiallahu anhu was like, this is a victory? Like even for him, he was like confused. And yet, what happened at that time? Hi. He's just listening. He's learning. So what happened at that time? Now on the outside, again, it looked like a defeat, right? Oppression, defeat. But what do we now know, looking back, right? Like hindsight, they say, is what? 2020. What ended up happening? Well, part of the agreement was that there would be a truce, right? And there would be no more fighting. And so what happened is for the next 2 years, more people entered Islam than all of the previous years combined. You hearing what's happening here? More people entered Islam in those next 2 years than all of over the decade, more than a decade that had passed. And what happens after that? Well, that what seemed like a defeat became what opened Fath Makkah. It was actually the beginning of the victory. But it didn't look like that from the outside. It looked like a defeat. And so one lesson we can learn from this is, things are not what they seem in the physical world. And the physical world can be very deceptive. In the physical world, something can look like defeat when in fact it is a victory. So now I want to go back to the definition of victory. All right? I'll put it this way. There are two ways that you can have victory. Okay? To simplify, 2 ways you can have victory. Number 1 is the obvious victory, like, winning in the physical world, right? Defeating your enemy in the physical world. This is an obvious definition of victory, right? That's what we all want. But there's another definition of victory, and that is something in the unseen. And that other definition of victory is to stand your ground and to never let go of La ilaha illallah. And that is actually the most deepest victory. Why? Well, because how long is this life? How long? Anyone? Maybe she's at 60. Okay, let's hope for a little more than that. But it's, let's say 100. Okay, you're doing really well, right? Yeah. Okay, like Biden's running out of time. I don't know what he's doing. He's 80 something, right? La hawla wa la. You'd think like, dude, you're on your way. Khalas. Anyways, say you're doing really well, 100 years. This life lasts 100 years, say. How long does the next life last? Forever. So it's not difficult mathematics. This life is basically negligible to little to nothing compared to the next life, right? So if there is something that happens to you in this life, and because of that thing that happens to you, you get success forever, then have you won or have you lost? Even if that thing in this life was painful. You tell me, just as a mathematician, you don't even have to be a mathematician to make this equation, to make this assessment. So you lose something in this life, maybe even your life, but you gain forever. Have you lost or have you won? Which one? Obviously. Now let me flip it. Imagine you get some sort of victory in this life. I'm gonna put that in quotation marks. Victory in this life. You look like a big man, But you've lost forever. Have you lost or have you won? That's ultimate loss. That's actually the definition of failure. This is what we have to go back to, the true definition of winning and losing. And it is not by this temporary life. Because a person who only sees this temporary life and doesn't see forever has literally missed the forest. And missed it. So what we have to look at is this. Have they won the hereafter? Have they won the hereafter? And if someone wins the hereafter, have they won or have they lost? They've won. And so the fact, and I want to bring this back to what we're witnessing right now in Gaza, is the fact that we are witnessing, and not just us, but the entire world is witnessing something miraculous in Gaza. And it's actually baffling the non-Muslims. It's baffling them so much they're like, I need to figure this out. I need to go get a Quran and I need to study the Quran because I need to figure this out. How can they do that? How can they lose everything? How can they lose their whole family and their home and still hold on to faith? How can they do that? And it bewilders people. That is victory. You understand? The fact that they can hold on to their iman and hold on to La ilaha illallah. And in fact, when at the moment of the calamity, you know how Allah says, إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّ لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Like when the calamity befalls them, they say, indeed we belong to Allah and indeed to Allah we return. We're seeing that like in real time. High definition, as they say, right? We're watching that. How do you think someone can do that? How do you think someone can do that when they've lost everything? When people, they curse God because they didn't get the car they wanted or something, or they didn't, things didn't happen the way they wanted, and they curse God. Or they disbelieve in God. God, you didn't give me my way, I'm going to show you, I'm going to become an atheist. And they think they're punishing God. I'm going to show you, God. It's like adult temper tantrums against God for nothing because they didn't get their way. And yet these people lose everything and they don't let go of God. Do you understand? That is victory. And by the way, that's God-given. That's God-given victory. That is the nasr of Allah. That is the istiqamah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where you get that ability to be steadfast despite the storm. And that's only given from God. That is God-given, and that can only come from Iman. So, we have to redefine our definition of victory. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and now this brings me to the other point, and that is what is happening as a result of the istiqamah of the Palestinian people. What are we witnessing in the world around us? We're witnessing people trying to find out more about Islam. We're witnessing people converting. We're witnessing people reading about the Quran. There's the famous, I think Megan, her name is? Everyone knows about Megan, right? But not just her, but so many other people. And look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ. This is what we're talking about, isn't it? Allah says, He says, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ. When the help of Allah comes and the opening and the victory. إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. And you see people entering into the deen of Allah in crowds. That's what we're seeing. And we're asking, where is the nasr of Allah? Where is the help of Allah? Where is the victory of Allah? Because, why? Because we've limited the definition of victory to only the physical world. As if this is the only life we have. YOLO. But we know it's not the only life we have. And we know that, in fact, if we make a comparison, it is actually nothing compared to eternity. You can take 100 years, you can take 500 years and compare it to infinity, it's still nothing. Yes or no? Mathematically. And we know also that this is experientially what we will think when we are asked in the hereafter, how long were you in that life? And they say, what? لَبِثْنَا يَوْمًا أَوْ بَعْضَ يَوْمًا. I don't know, I think it was a day or part of a day. Experientially, that's how it feels. Like when you go to the hereafter and people are asking, how long were we in that life again? And they say, oh, a day or part of a day. I don't know. Ask the people who are keeping track. Because of how insignificant this life is compared to the next life. That is the reality that the people in Gaza understand. That's why. Because if people are wondering, how can they be holding their dead child and smiling? Anybody wonder about that? Don't you think that's strange? Don't you think that's strange? Yes or no? How can you be holding your dead child and smiling? Did you guys all know the guy, the man who's holding his his daughter? This recent And he's kissing her eyes and he's talking to her, and he actually has a smile on his face. Don't you think that's strange? How can that happen? That is the nasr of Allah. That is the help of Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us this. You know when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, listen to this hadith. See, when we look at that, we look at a man who's holding his dead child and smiling, or the mother whose daughter was going to get married, and she says she's the most beautiful bride in the world, and because she was martyred, and she will be the bride in Jannah. How does that happen? We look at that, we should think, that's strange. And the Prophet ﷺ actually said, "Ajabun li amril mu'min." See how it connects? Ajabun. What does that mean? It means that the matter of a believer is actually quite strange. Ajab. It's like, that's actually true. This is why people are looking at it and say, that's really strange. That's why Megan's like, that's strange. That's why people opening the Quran, because it is strange. Ajabun li amril mu'min. The matter of a believer is very strange. It is amazing. Amruhu kullu khair. Because all of his or her matters are good. That's why it's strange. No matter what happens to a believer, it's actually good. That's why it's strange. Because we are those who are limited by the physical world, those who have a YOLO mentality, to them, it doesn't make sense. Because the only way to have something be good is if you're getting more money, or you're defeating your enemy, or you're having more power, or you're having more oil. That's the only way to win. That to them is the only victory. So it's very strange when someone has that mentality to look at a people who are actually smiling when they've lost everything. To look at Asiya, right? What happened to Asiya? She's being tortured, or they tried to torture her. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed her home in Jannah, so she smiled. That's ajab. That's strange. That's strange, but that is the matter of a believer. Ajabun li amrin mu'min. Why? Everything is good for a believer. Amruhu kullu khair. Why? Because there's one of two states, right? You either get what makes you happy, or you get what makes you not happy. Those are only two options, right? You get what you want, or you get what you don't want. But for a believer, it's all good. That's what the hadith is saying. That's why the hadith is saying the matter of a believer is so strange and so amazing. Because the believer either has one of two states. When you get what you want, you show gratitude. And I want to point out that none of you should feel guilty because you have been privileged. None of you should feel guilty about that. Why? Because it's also a test. Your privilege is a test too. And your ease, at whatever level Allah has given you blessings and ease and privilege and status and money and influence, all of that is a test. You're also being tested, and I'm also being tested. And we are tested with ease as well as hardship. So never think, this feeling of guilt that I'm not, they're going through this, but I'm not being tested. Well, you are being tested. You're being tested with your privilege. How do you use that privilege? Because they're being tested, and we're seeing how they're performing in their test. How are we performing in our test? The other thing I want to point out is, that the wake-up call is not only for the non-Muslims. It's not only for the non-Muslims. My teacher said that after he gave a khutbah, this boy comes up to him, this young man comes up to him and he says, this is the life I was living before this happened. I was doing drugs, I was drinking, I was clubbing, I was sleeping around. And he said, when this started, I made the decision to make tawbah to Allah, to change my life, to transform my life, in hopes that if I transform my life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can protect and save the people of Gaza. I want you to just reflect on how deep that is. Because it brought him back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he's not the only one. There are so many people, not just the non-Muslims, being inspired by the Palestinians, but Muslims too. Muslims coming back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and coming back to the Quran and coming back to faith, watching the power of their faith. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that sometimes He gives us hardships. And hardships can come at an individual level, or hardships can come at a societal level, a global level. And He says that one of the reasons why He gives us hardships, لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجَعُونَ, in order for them to come back. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَضَرَّعُونَ, in order for them to humble themselves, to recognize the fact that they need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to wake up, to wake up. لِيُمَحِّصَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, so that Allah will purify the believers. And this is what we have to realize. Hardships do different things to different people. Okay? So there's one of the statements of the scholar says that a hardship, and it can be the same hardship, will do different things depending on your state, the state of your heart. So for the hardship, he says, Siraj is a light, illuminating light. Sirajun lil-arifin. It is an illumination for the one who knows Allah. So what does that do? How does that look like? It's an illumination because it makes that person who knows Allah shine even more brightly. So if someone already knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hardship will come. I feel you. If someone already knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hardship will come and make them shine. Okay? The second category is the people of ghafla. What is ghafla? Ghafla is heedlessness. Heedlessness. So for the people who are heedless, that category, it is a wake-up call. It is something to wake them up. You're asleep, this is gonna wake you up. It's an alarm. Your house is on fire. Wake up. Wake up. So there's two categories so far. What's the third category? The oppressor. For the oppressor, the hardship is destruction. So you understand? The same hardship. For the one who knows Allah, it will be an illumination. It will make them shine. This is why we're seeing what we're seeing in Gaza. Because they already knew Allah. These are people who already knew Allah. I was attending a charity dinner, and one of the founder of the charity, he came back and he said, because he had spent a lot of time in Gaza, he actually left Gaza like 2 days before this started. And he said that the people in Gaza are so special. And he said he's always felt that the people in Gaza were very special. He said that there was in 1 year, I think it was something like 24,000 huffaz in 1 year, just in Gaza. 24,000 people who finished memorizing the Quran. He says that he always felt that Gaza was the only place on earth that was actually free, and that the rest of the world is under siege, spiritually. SubhanAllah. It was so powerful what he said. I'll tell you one other story he said. He said that he went to Gaza and there was a father who came to him and said, I need you to help me to send my daughter to college. I need you to find a sponsor to help send my daughter to college. I want her to go to university and I want her to get her degree. In Arabic, her shahada, right? So the brother said, okay, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to find a sponsor for your daughter so she can finish her education. And he said that in October, the father reached out to him and he said, Alhamdulillah, she received her shahada. And what he meant is that istashhadat. Istashhadat. This is their mentality. This is their mentality. So the hardship just becomes like a spotlight to show what's already beautiful and make it shine. But it is also a wake-up call for the people of heedlessness. And I think that for all of us, it really has been a wake-up call. And of course, it is a destruction for the oppressor. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم سبحانك الله وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. I want to add one other thing before I want to take questions and discussion, and that is, there is a sense, I think a lot of people have, I heard this and it really, really moved me. He said, my teacher said that we have this sense that I'm making dua. Everyone says, make dua, make dua, make dua for the people of Gaza, make dua for the people who are suffering and oppressed. And people get to this place where they feel like I'm making dua, I'm making dua, I'm making dua, but I don't see any victory. I don't see any outcome. I feel like our dua isn't really, where is the result of our dua? And he said something so profound. He said, do you ever think that maybe their istiqamah, their ability to hold their ground, and that strength that we're seeing in the videos could be because of our dua? So you shouldn't feel that your dua is that you're helpless. You're not helpless. Your dua is powerful. And he said, imagine that every believer in the world is making dua for you. Imagine the strength that would give you. And the iman and the ability to withstand these calamities that are like next level calamities. That is the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Lastly, mashallah, he's just listening, you know. The other thing that my teacher said that really moved me is that we just talked about the istiqamah of the Palestinian people, and we might look at that, and I think there's a lot of the sentiment that, like, you know, not all heroes wear capes and that type of thing. Like, look at these heroes, look at their ability to withstand this onslaught of like this unbelievable calamity and to continue to hold on to faith, right? And we look at that and we think, like, I could never do that, right? Like, this is the feeling, is like, no, they're like superhuman, you know, they're like next level, right? I could never do that. And he said something so deep, and I'm gonna try to explain it as best I can. He said that anyone's ability to stand their ground comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? We have to know this. It doesn't come from me. It doesn't come from my strength, my abilities, okay? We said at the beginning, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, right? So this strength only comes from Allah. So he said this. He said the default is Allah is the one who is the wali, okay? That's one of his attributes. So he will take care of you as a default. The question is, what have I done to block that? And I don't know if that hit you like it hit me, but I was like, wow. It isn't that only special people get the help of Allah. You guys understand what I'm saying? It isn't just only special superheroes get the help of Allah. The default is the help of Allah. The default is that Allah is the wali, and He takes and He protects as a default. The question is, what am I doing in my life? And what am I doing in the way that I'm living to block that? To block the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he goes on and he explains that some of the things that they are doing, like some of the things that they have that we don't. And because we don't have that, we've blocked it. we're blocking in our own lives the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I just want to just summarize it. It is very, it's very deep, but just to summarize it, one of the things that they have is clearly they do not have an attachment to dunya. And part of that is, it's not their choice. It's God-given. Like, they don't have dunya to be attached to dunya. So for us, it's, in that sense, harder. It's a harder test because we have dunya. We're drowning in dunya. So it's harder to not be attached. You understand? But the attachment to dunya is a weight on us. You know, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, when you're called to struggle in the way of Allah, listen carefully, when you're called to struggle in the way of Allah, إِثْتَاقَلْتُ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ, that you become heavy to the earth. Because the attachment to dunya is a dead weight, it's a weight. It keeps us down, it keeps us heavy. It becomes very difficult to be strong. It weakens. Think of it as a chain. So you're chained, depending on the level of your attachment, is the level of your chains to the earth. So it's very difficult for you to take action when necessary, to sacrifice when necessary, to give when necessary, because you're held down, chained to your money or chained to your dunya. They're not chained to these things. And so that's one of the reasons why they have so much strength. So again, this can become a block for us, is the amount of chains that we have. Okay. Inshallah, I'll pause there, but just a reminder to myself and you, obviously, every time we live a life that is disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are also weakening ourselves. So that is a weakening of our own, if you will, call it a spiritual immune system. So that when things come our way, we have less ability to be resilient, right? Immune system, right? Immune system, if it's strong, it can handle the viruses and the bacteria and it doesn't kill you, right? But if your immune system is suppressed, that's when you become weak. That's when, you can die of the flu, right? So a common cold can kill you. And all depends on the strength of the immune system. So what weakens our spiritual immune system? It is, of course, the disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at whatever level. The attachment to dunya. These are all things that weaken us. So when you don't have those things, that's when you see amazing resilience and amazing strength. Because the immune system is strong. The spiritual immunity is strong. So we can also strengthen our immunity and leave the things that weaken the immune system. Finally, let me just make this point. The Prophet ﷺ said that the ummah in its love and mercy for one another is like one body. If one side of that body, if one part of that body is suffering, the entire body responds in fever. So think about the body. How can you help the body that is suffering? And the answer is strengthen the immunity, right? And so there are things, we should never feel helpless because there are things that we can do to strengthen this body that is the ummah. And that is strengthen each and every one of us. Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Indeed, Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change what's inside themselves. So one of the best things we can do for this body that's suffering is what? Strengthen me, because I'm part of that body, right? And if you strengthen the immunity, you strengthen the ability to fight off any intruder, antigen, intruder, enemy, etc. What makes us weak is the attachments to dunya and the disobedience to Allah. You know the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said there will come a time when the nations will call one another to attack you like people call one another to eat from their dish. I always am very moved by this hadith because I couldn't think of a better way to describe it. You know, you have a big dish. You know, sometimes you have maqluba in like a huge dish, right? And you have 10 different people eating from the same dish. Come on, have some. The Prophet ﷺ says that the ummah will become in such a state that the enemies will call one another, here, come take a piece of them. Come take a piece of the ummah, take a piece of the believer, the Muslims. Come. Like that's how weak they become. And the companions thought, oh, it must be because they're small in number. He says, is it because we will be small in number? And look what the Prophet ﷺ says. He says, no, actually they will be large in number. Is this sounding familiar? Listen carefully. They'll be large in number, but they will be like the foam on the ocean. You know the foam, like the bubbles, the scum on the waves? Totally weak, powerless, no self-determination. No, I mean, what power does that, you know, the bubbles, literally. Like, what is it? Nothing, insignificant. But there's so much of it. There's so many of it, there's so much. But weak. But listen carefully why. The Prophet ﷺ diagnoses the cause of the weakness. He says that the fear will be taken out of the hearts of your enemies. And in your hearts will be put a disease called wahan. And he defines wahan as hubb ad-dunya wa karahiyat al-maut. The love of dunya. That's actually the cause of the weakness. The love of dunya and the hatred of death. That is not a disease in the hearts of the Ghazans. That is not in the hearts of the Palestinian people. And that's why they're so strong. But it is a disease in many of us. And that's the cause of our weakness. It's actually the wahan. So we want to make this entire ummah that is one body stronger, work on the wahan. Because that is weakening the immunity. It's attacking the immune system. Okay. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم سبحانك الله وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Let's inshallah open it up for questions and reflections now. Yes. Okay, so I'll repeat her question and do my best to address it. She's saying that like one of the ways that we combat fear is actually to say you are in control. You know, it's like this narrative of like you make your own destiny, and that's supposed to make you feel better. I can't imagine anything scarier than that. Like, what could be scarier than saying that I'm in charge? What do I know? Like I am a human being. I don't know even what's on the other side of this wall. Like my knowledge is so limited. My ability is so limited. How could I possibly take the steering of this ship called my life or anyone else's life, right? How can I be responsible? So I think that's actually very scary if you think about it properly. The question of effort is an important question. So if I have no control over the outcome, why should I put in any effort? It's a very natural question. Do you know the answer to it? It's something you wouldn't think. The answer is because the effort is part of your worship. That's the only reason. It's very interesting, but that's actually the only reason. Let me give you an example. You ready? 2 examples. First example, Musa alayhi salam in front of the Red Sea. He's stuck, or it appears, as it appears. فَلَمَّا تَرَى الْجَمْعَانِ قَالَ أَصْحَابُ مُوسَى إِنَّ لَمُدْرَكُونَ. That when Musa alayhi salam, he's with Bani Israel, and they see Pharaoh. Pharaoh's like superpower army coming for them. And now they're stuck. So the people with Musa alayhi salam say, we're going to be overtaken now. إِنَّ لَمُدْرَكُونَ قَالَ كَلَّا إِنَّ مَعَيَ رَبِّ سَيَهْدِينِ. He goes, nope, absolutely not. We will not be overtaken. إِنَّ مَعَيَ رَبِّ. Indeed, my Lord is with me, and he will get me through this. This was his tawakkul, right? But there was something he was commanded to do first. What was it? What was he told to do, guys? He was told to take his staff and hit the sea, strike the sea with it. This is effort, right? This is amal, this is effort. But let me ask you this question. If you go, to the ocean or to the lake and you take a stick and you strike it to the ocean or the lake, does it split in half? Why not? This is not the way the world works, right? And yet, Allah made it split in half. So, his effort was because Allah told him to. But his effort didn't bring about the result. Does it make sense? But why did he do it? He could have been like, okay, honestly, what's the point? Like, what's that going to do right now? You know what I mean? How sometimes as Muslims we might question things? What's the point? What's the point of wearing hijab? Or what's the point of praying 5 times a day? What's the point? Right? When Allah says something, and we might not understand the wisdom, and one could think that, one might think, what is going to be the point of striking the sea just now? But he hears and he obeys. That's what we have to do. So, the effort is part of sami'na wa ata'na. The effort is actually a command from Allah. It's actually part of our worship. We hear and we obey. We do it because Allah said so. We don't do it because we're bringing the result. We do it because this is the sunnah of Allah and it's a commandment of Allah to do your part. Like, going and striving to get a job. You could say, no, the risk comes from Allah. Of course the risk comes from Allah, but you still have to strive. And that's the second example. Hajar. Hajar in the middle of the desert. Did she have tawakkul? Yes, she absolutely had tawakkul. She had reliance on Allah, but she didn't just sit there and wait for the water to come from the sky. She got up and she ran between Safa and Marwa 7 times. And that is called what? Sa'i. Means to strive. And the striving is the worship. What do we do when we go to Mecca? We follow in her footsteps because the striving was the worship. 7 times. So the effort is the worship. However, her running between Safa and Marwa isn't what caused water to come from the sand. When you guys go and you do sa'i in Hajj and Umrah, does water come from the sand? No, it's not a direct relate. It's not a cause and effect. Allah is the one who brings the result. Allah opened the sea. Allah caused the Zamzam to open from the sand, to come from the sand. But you're doing your effort as part of your relationship with Allah, part of your worship. The sa'i is the worship. The striking of the sea is the worship. The tying of the camel in the hadith. اعقلها وتوكل. Right? The man wasn't tying his camel. Why not? He said, because I have trust in Allah. The Prophet ﷺ said, اعقلها وتوكل. Tie it and put your trust in Allah. Tying your camel is your worship. So anyway, that by the way, that also translates when you're having a problem in your life. Okay, I just want to say this because this is one of the biggest things that I focus on in my books and in my seminars is this concept of we have to take action when we are in a bad situation. That we have to take action, and that action is part of our worship. So when your house is on fire, for example, you can't just sit, look at the fire, and say, I have so much sabr, so I'm not going to do anything. That would actually be wrong. But of course, this is how we teach sabr, isn't it? Your house is on fire. Sister, have sabr. Have sabr, sister. Why are you calling the fire department? Why are you getting a fire extinguisher? Have sabr. You have to do something. That's part of your worship. That's not the meaning of sabr, that you just sit and do nothing. Otherwise, Hajar would have just sat. There's one other point that you remind me of, and that is that this is related to mental health. Okay, so one of the things that sometimes happens is that we experience pain in our lives, and that pain is actually like a smoke alarm. So let me explain what that means. What is the purpose of a smoke alarm in your house? The purpose of a smoke alarm is to be really, really sensitive to any sign of smoke. And if it does sense smoke, it alarms. Now, does it alarm in a really relaxing way? Does it say, like, does it lull you back to sleep? Is it comforting? Have you ever heard an alarm before? It's not comforting. It's obnoxious. It's loud. It makes you what? Uncomfortable, right? It's supposed to do that. Why? Because it's meant to force you out of your sleep, out of your distraction. If you're not paying attention, it's meant to wake you up. If you're distracted, it's meant to shake you up, to force you to do what? To go and take out the batteries, of course. Right? Yeah, you feel me, right? I don't like the sound of the smoke alarm, so I got a really good solution. I'll just go, take out the batteries, and then go back to sleep. Well, it's really nice because you don't have to hear it anymore, but your house is still burning down. And this is what a lot of us do with our pain. So the way that I explain it, especially in the book Healing the Emptiness, is that your pain is like a smoke alarm. And you guess what? Your depression is like a smoke alarm. Your anxiety is like a smoke alarm. Your trust issues, your relationship issues, that your panic attacks are actually a smoke alarm. And what many of us do, because it is uncomfortable, but it's supposed to be uncomfortable, why? Because it's forcing you to try to find the source of the fire and do what? Go back to sleep? Look at it and say, I have so much sabr? No. So you take action to do what? To extinguish the fire. But many of us, what we do with our pain is just take out the batteries. You know what that is? That's escapism. That's addictions. That's trying to numb the pain, trying to escape from it. But the alarm itself is actually telling you there's a fire in your life. There's something that needs to be healed. There's something that needs to be addressed. There's something that needs to be changed. And the fact that you keep on ignoring it does not make the fire go away. So the idea here and the whole concept of healing the emptiness is looking for the source of our suffering and not engaging in escape tactics, escape mechanisms, things that we go to try to take out the batteries. Okay? By the way, there's different ways that people take out the batteries. Some people go to drugs, alcohol, addictions. Some people distract themselves with staying busy. Some people distract themselves with work. Some people actually take out the batteries and distract themselves and numb the pain by people-pleasing. By feeling like if I can just make people always happy with me, then I don't have to feel this sense of self-loathing or lack of self-worth. But they're not addressing the root cause. And the root cause can be in one or more of 4 elements of your life. So the way I divide it is that there are 4, if you think of it in this analogy, there are 4 rooms of your house that you need to check for the source of the fire. Okay, the alarm is going off, means there's a fire. You can't just take out the batteries, you gotta find the source, right? What are those 4 rooms? The first one is the biological. Yes, if we have a breakdown biologically, it can cause suffering. So you check the biological. Maybe you have a deficiency. Maybe there's, a biological or medical issue. But that is not the end of the story. That's only one room. The second room is the psychological. And this has to do with the way we think. There are certain thinking patterns that people fall into that cause a lot of suffering. And what I do in the book is I talk about each of these, and the psychological, I talk about what are some of the psychological habits that we fall into that perpetuate our own suffering. This includes negative self-talk, by the way. The way we talk to ourselves, very important. The way you talk to yourself is essential, okay? A lot of people talk to themselves with no self-compassion. He's been patient, and mashallah, now he's got a lot to say. He has a lot of feedback. He has a lot of feelings. So I'll just give you an example of how we talk to ourselves. So I want you to imagine that your friend comes to you and is like, you know what? I've messed up. Like I made a big mistake or I failed at something really big. Now, can you imagine that you respond to your friend and you're like, you are a complete failure. You actually are worthless. Exactly. You're worthless. You're useless. You'll never get it right. You are a failure. You failed because you are a failure. No one's ever going to respect, love you. You're not worthy of these things. And you're fat. Right? And you're fat. You're not, what is it? I don't hate you because you're fat because I hate you. That's from Mean Girls, in case y'all, that's not your generation. Apparently they're having another, silly. Anyways, imagine you talk to your friend that way. What's going to happen to that relationship? Imagine you talk to your spouse that way. Well, you don't have to be a marriage counselor to know that that's going to be a problematic situation, right? You're damaging that relationship. You with me? What happens when you keep talking to yourself that way? Right? We agreed that type of language is pretty verbally abusive, right? Imagine someone talks to someone that way. That's called abuse. But why is it okay to abuse ourselves in the way we speak to ourselves when we fall short? And this is just one of the ways that we actually perpetuate our own suffering, just because we're just actually really mean to ourselves. And a lot of times, this is another deep part of it, is that we talk to ourselves the way we were spoken to growing up. And there's another thing where I really wish I could speak to parents. And I really wish I could tell parents to watch their tongues. Watch your tongues. You feel me over here, yeah? Why? Because the way you speak to your children, especially when they make a mistake, becomes the way they speak to themselves for the rest of their lives. That's pretty important. Parents are pretty important. And even if that child hates that parent, they still hear that parent in their head. That's still their inner voice. So it's very, and that needs healing. That needs to be healthy. Because if you're speaking to yourself like that, you're drinking poison. You have to heal that. So this is one of the psychological elements of why am I suffering. Sometimes it's just, let me just give you one other one really quick, okay? The other one is, what do we do with negative thoughts? Okay? So I want you to think about negative thoughts like someone knocking on the door of your house, and that man that's knocking on the door of your house is holding a machete, a knife, a rifle, and like a pistol. Okay, he's got lots of weapons. What are you going to do when you see this man standing outside your house? Is anyone going to open the door? Is anyone going to say, come on in, stay a while, have some biryani and chai? Maqluba and shay? Absolutely not. You're going to keep the door closed, right? Okay. Every single negative thought is like that man standing with weapons outside of the door of your mind. Got it? So the negative thought knocks. We can't control who knocks on the door of our mind, right? You can't control what thought knocks. But boy, do you have control over which thoughts you let in and which thoughts you feed. So when you're letting this guy in and you're like, stay a while, well, he's only there to do harm. Why would you give him space? And then on top of it, why would you feed him? But this is what we do, many of us, and we don't realize that we have very bad habits mentally. The way we deal with negative thoughts is we actually give it space, we let it in, and we feed it. And this happens a lot with fear. We feed fear. This happens a lot with, anger, like when we have something that someone did, and then you start off. It's usually your spouse, right? Like this, you start off this upset about it, but then as you keep thinking about it, anyone else? As you keep thinking, someone said something offensive, but you keep on thinking about it, and then you keep thinking about it, and you're feeding it, and you actually get more and more angry about it. And I'm not saying you should just swallow things and it just goes away. No, it's actually better to address it, because sitting and thinking about it just makes it worse, and it makes you more and more angry. And it's like, no, and then you become passive aggressive, and you're really feeling that's good. You're like, yeah, I get that. And of course, us women were taught to swallow. You know, I met a woman, she told me that her mother said to her, you should be able to drink poison and keep a smile on your face. Like, I feel like that's such a, like, toxic and yet very accurate, like, description or summary of what women are taught. You better be able to drink poison and keep a smile on your face. Absolutely not. That's so toxic. I mean, anyway, so I talk about this. We're number 3. So we said you have to check the physical, you have to check the psychological is healthy, but you also have to check the environment is healthy, because this is one of the things we don't realize. You know, you tell an abused woman, so many abused women are told this, like, have sabr, sister. Go back, but have sabr in our community means keep drinking the poison. Keep standing in the burning house and do nothing. That's our definition of sabr. That is absolute oppression and dhulm. Can you imagine if there's a family sitting in a burning house and you tell them, no, just stay? Okay, fine. If your house is on fire, what is step 1? I'm always interested when people's answer to this. What's step 1 if your house is on fire? See, there's two camps. There's always 2 camps. There's the people who say, run. Evacuate. And then there's the people who say, try to extinguish fire. No, I feel you. It's like the fight or flight, right? You can always hear the flight people. They're like, run. Well, presumably, we try to extinguish the fire first. Try to save the house. Yeah. Yes. So we try to save the house first, meaning if it can be saved. If it can be saved, call the fire department, get the fire extinguisher, do something to save the house. So if your house is on fire, you're in an abusive home, or you're in, a painful marriage. Step 1 is, yes, try to extinguish the fire. I'm not saying you just let it burn. See ya. Try to extinguish the fire. Try to address the fire. But for the love of God Almighty, if the fire continues, get the blank out of there, right? I mean, who's gonna tell you, yes, you tried, yes, we all you tried to take out the fire, but it continued, so stay in there. And if someone says that, aren't they doing dhulm? Isn't that dhulm? To tell someone, you tried to extinguish the fire, it continues to burn in your house, and stay in there with your children. I mean, I consider that one of the worst types of dhulm. But this is unfortunately what we see. And they'll block the doors even. No, you're staying in there. Imagine if that house is on fire and you're blocking the doors and keeping that woman or man and their children stuck in that burning house. Wouldn't that be dhulm? So we try to extinguish the fire. But if it continues, you can't stay in a burning house. So environment matters. Finally, the 4th room we have to check is the spiritual room. And I argue this is the most significant room. It is the most significant, but it isn't the only room. And so what the basic message of this book is that in order for us to be healthy and to not suffer in life, and there's a difference, and I explain it, I don't have time now. There's a difference between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable. We will all experience some level of pain. And sometimes the pain itself is the smoke alarm. But suffering is something else. Suffering is what happens when we ignore the smoke alarm and the house burns down around us. So the idea is that in order for us to be healthy and to not experience suffering, which again is different than pain, We have to be healthy in all of these 4 elements. Not just the biological, but also the psychological, the environmental, and the spiritual. And when all 4 of these are healthy, then yes, we will experience pain, but it's not the suffering that happens when you ignore the alarm or you continue to stand in a burning house. Okay, I think we are meant to wrap up now, inshallah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Yasmin. Thank you so much for being here with us and helping us work on healing our hearts. And what was the other one? Strengthening our spirits. There we go. Thank you so much, Sister Yasmin. And I ask Allah to make it easy for us to continue to do good and continue to work on ourselves and continue to be. May Allah make us be a source of mercy for our communities. And may Allah make us a source of, inshallah, for the du'as of those who are in Gaza, who are suffering, for their du'as to be answered as well. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us more and more opportunities to get together as our sisters in our community as well. But just because I made a dua doesn't mean that we're done with the program, because we will have more programs. So I will let you all know that, as you noticed, Sister Yasmin also mentioned a lot of points from her books. She's actually going to be selling them right in the lobby here and doing a book signing for the next 15 to 20 minutes. Before everybody disperses, I just want you all to know that that's going to be for the next 15, 20 minutes. And from there, we have basically open time in the gym for everyone to get food, and also we'll be doing a bonfire outside, in addition to, of course, you all make wudu, but basically, when you are back in the musalla, the time you need to remember is 11:10. So everyone's had their food, done their wudu, got their book signed, all of that, back here by 11:10, inshallah. But we will, and I'll give another reminder as well. So inshallah, we will go ahead and shuffle over to the lobby. But before anybody moves, I actually wanted to get a clip for the Rise Instagram for IAR, if you're okay with it. So when I say ready, set, go, can you all say Rise at IAR with some enthusiasm, please, so people don't think sisters programs are boring? That would be great. I would so appreciate that. All right, ready? Get yourself shuffled, flip the hijab, do what you gotta do. Niqabify if you must. Do what you need to do. There's a whole wall of sisters over there. Oh my gosh, it's like a whole little gang. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. You're saying Rise at IAR. 3, 2, 1. Great, thank you. Perfect, okay. Jazakallah khair, we can go ahead now.